The Johnston family is imploding right now after private messages and financial records leaked, showing that Amber Johnston has been secretly negotiating with a high-profile family attorney to permanently sever legal ties with two of the adopted children, Anna and Alex, while simultaneously moving to rewrite the family's TLC contracts so the remaining household receives the majority of future earnings. The documents allegedly show she framed the move as protecting the bloodline legacy for Jonah, Liz, and baby Leighton. This is not a rumor floating around social media or a vague claim from an anonymous tipster. These are specific, detailed materials that paint a picture of calculated decisions being made behind closed doors, while the cameras kept rolling on a carefully curated image of unity and unconditional love. What makes this so jarring is the language itself. Sources familiar with the documents say Amber positioned the potential separation as a necessary step to safeguard the family's long-term brand and financial future. In her framing, the biological children and the newest generation represented the sustainable core of the show's appeal. Anna and Alex, by contrast, were treated in these private discussions as variables that could be adjusted or removed if their storylines no longer delivered the same viewer engagement. That kind of thinking turns family into content strategy, and once that shift becomes visible, everything the audience thought they understood about the Johnstons starts to crack. Before we dive into how this all started and why it happened, make sure to hit that subscribe button to Little People Buzz for more daily updates. The story is moving fast, and new details continue to surface that change the entire context of what the family has been presenting for years. The entire narrative flips when an unexpected figure steps forward, a former Johnston family nanny who worked in the house during the early adoption years. She has produced dated audio recordings and a signed non-disclosure agreement she claims Amber forced her to sign. In the tapes, Amber is heard discussing contingency plans if the adopted children's story arcs stopped delivering ratings, including quietly returning them to the system or settling them elsewhere with minimal ongoing support. The nanny's sudden public statement turns a private family power struggle into an external bombshell that neither Trent nor Amber can control. This is not someone with a casual connection or a distant relative with secondhand information. This is a person who was inside the home during the formative years of the adoptions, who witnessed the daily dynamics, and who says she was required to sign paperwork that effectively silenced her about what she saw and heard. The existence of those recordings changes the stakes completely. Until now, the leaked documents could be dismissed as incomplete drafts or misunderstood planning notes. Audio of Amber discussing contingency options for the adopted kids if ratings slipped is far harder to reframe. It introduces a pattern of thinking that appears to predate the current crisis by years. The nanny's decision to come forward also raises serious questions about the environment inside the household during those early seasons. If the claims are accurate, the adopted children were being evaluated not only as family members, but as ongoing contributors to the show's viability. That evaluation, according to the recordings, included contingency planning that treated their continued presence as conditional. For viewers who watched those early episodes and believed they were seeing a permanent expansion of the family, the idea that exit strategies were already being discussed in private is deeply unsettling. The conflict allegedly began months earlier behind closed doors, after internal TLC notes flagged declining viewer interest in the adult adopted children's storylines. Amber, according to the leaked materials, began treating the show's long-term profitability as a zero-sum game. She reportedly pushed Trent to consider restructuring the household so that biological children and the next generation, Liz, Bryce, and Leighton, became the primary on-camera focus. When Anna and Alex pushed back on reduced screen time and tighter parental oversight of their personal lives, the conversations escalated into secret legal consultations. The spark that set the current fire was Alex discovering draft documents on a shared family device that outlined exit provisions for the two of them. Those internal TLC notes appear to have been the original catalyst. Declining interest in certain storylines is not unusual for a long-running series, but the response described in the leaked materials goes far beyond normal production adjustments. Instead of developing new angles or giving the adult adopted children more agency in how their lives were portrayed, The direction reportedly shifted toward reducing their visibility and concentrating attention on the biological line and the newest family members. That decision, if accurately reflected in the documents, reveals a hierarchy that had been kept carefully hidden from the audience. Amber's reported push to restructure the household around the biological children and the next generation was not presented as a temporary production choice. According to the materials, it was framed as a long-term strategy for protecting the family's earning potential. Trent's role in these early discussions remains less clear from the available information, but the fact that the conversations progressed to legal consultations suggests at least some level of parental alignment at the time. The moment Alex found the draft documents on a shared device, the private planning collided with the reality of the adult children's own lives and expectations. What had been contained behind closed doors suddenly became impossible to keep contained. The discovery itself appears to have been accidental rather than the result of intentional investigation. Shared family devices are common in households that film together, and the presence of those draft exit provisions on one of them created an immediate rupture. Once Alex saw the language outlining potential severance and reduced ongoing support, the trust that had held the public image together began to collapse from the inside. Anna's response followed quickly, and the two of them began comparing notes on how their roles had been shifting over recent seasons. What they found, according to those close to them, confirmed a pattern of diminishing screen time, increased restrictions, and a growing emphasis on the younger biological generation as the future of the show. This is the point at which a family disagreement stopped being private and became a structural crisis. The documents did not simply propose changes in filming schedules. They proposed changes in legal status and financial entitlement. For Anna and Alex, that distinction matters enormously. Reduced camera time is one thing. Language that contemplates severing legal ties and limiting future claims on the family's media income is something else entirely. The emotional impact of reading that language, after years of being presented to the world as permanent members of the Johnston family, cannot be overstated. What had been a carefully managed public narrative of blended family resilience was now facing direct contradiction from the family's own internal planning. Anna and Alex were no longer dealing with ordinary parental tension or production disagreements. They were confronting language that treated their place in the household as negotiable. That realization did not stay private for long. Once the draft documents circulated among the siblings, the emotional fracture widened quickly, and the carefully maintained image of unity began to show visible cracks in real time. Trent and Amber have gone into full lockdown mode. Amber has issued a tightly controlled statement denying any plan to abandon family members and framing the documents as exploratory estate planning drafts taken out of context. Trent has publicly aligned with her, insisting the family remains united and that any legal discussions were only about protecting everyone from future financial instability. Behind the scenes, sources close to the couple say they have demanded the adult children sign new confidentiality agreements and have already begun limiting which siblings appear in upcoming filming blocks. Their strategy is clear: contain the story, reassert parental authority, and keep TLC from pulling the plug. Amber's public statement is carefully worded. It acknowledges that legal documents exist, but insists they were never intended as an active plan to remove anyone from the family. She describes them as preliminary thoughts about long-term financial security and estate structure, the kind of conversations many parents eventually have when a large blended household and a media income stream are involved. Trent's comments reinforce that framing. He has emphasized that the family is still whole, that love for every child remains unchanged, and that outside interpretations of the documents have exaggerated and distorted private planning. Together, they present a united front aimed at calming sponsors, network executives, and the audience. The private reality described by those close to the situation looks different. Multiple sources report that Amber and Trent have moved aggressively to limit further leaks. New confidentiality language has been presented to the adult children, framed as necessary protection for the family's ongoing work with the network. Filming schedules have been adjusted in ways that reduce the visibility of Anna and Alex in upcoming blocks. Access to certain shared accounts and devices has been restricted. These steps are consistent with a damage control operation designed to reassert control before the story expands further. Whether those measures will succeed remains an open question, because the adult children are no longer cooperating with the previous pattern of silence. Anna and Alex have refused to stay silent. Anna has reportedly retained her own counsel and is preparing a formal response that challenges both the legal validity of any attempted severance and the parents' control over show-related income. Alex has gone further, circulating the leaked materials among the siblings and openly discussing the emotional fracture with Liz. Liz, caught between loyalty to her parents and solidarity with her siblings, has begun limiting Trent and Amber's access to Leighton until the situation is resolved. Jonah has stayed quieter, but is said to be privately supporting the adopted siblings. The result is an open rift. The children are no longer presenting a united front for the cameras and are actively documenting every parental demand as potential evidence. Anna's decision to hire independent legal representation marks a significant escalation. By treating the situation as a formal legal matter rather than a private family disagreement, she is signaling that she will not accept the parents' framing without scrutiny. Her preparation of a response that questions both the severance language and the control of media-related income suggests she is looking beyond emotional injury to concrete questions of rights and compensation. Years of participation in a family show that generated substantial revenue create a complicated set of claims, and Anna appears prepared to examine those claims carefully. Alex's approach has been more public and more confrontational. By sharing the leaked materials with the other siblings and discussing the emotional damage openly with Liz, he has made it impossible for the rest of the family to pretend the issue does not exist. The conversations with Liz appear to have been particularly consequential. Liz is both a biological child and the mother of Leighton, the youngest member of the household. Her decision to limit Trent and Amber's access to the baby until the conflict is resolved introduces a new layer of pressure. It turns the grandparents' relationship with their grandchild into a point of leverage, something that was never part of the public family story. Jonah's quieter stance does not mean neutrality. Those familiar with the internal dynamics say he has expressed private support for Anna and Alex while avoiding public statements that would further inflame the situation. That measured approach may reflect an attempt to preserve some remaining channels of communication. But it also underscores how thoroughly the old united front has dissolved. The children are no longer coordinating their public image for the cameras. Instead, they are documenting demands, preserving messages, and treating parental requests as potential future evidence. That shift from cooperative cast members to independent parties protecting their own interests changes the practical reality of any future filming. TLC is already intervening. Network executives have paused certain production commitments while they review whether the parents' private legal moves violate existing family-based casting and compensation agreements. If the severance language is deemed an attempt to alter the show's core cast without network approval, the Johnstons could face contract penalties or even non-renewal. Anna and Alex's potential claims open the door to civil action over alleged emotional and financial exploitation tied to years of on-camera life. The bigger risk is reputational. Sponsors and future streaming deals become far harder to secure once the public narrative shifts from loving blended family to parents shopping exit strategies for their kids. The network's decision to pause production commitments is a clear signal that the situation has moved beyond internal family management. TLC's agreements with the Johnstons have always rested on the premise of a functioning family unit whose members appear together under shared contractual terms. Language that contemplates removing two of the adult children from that unit without network involvement creates immediate legal and practical problems. Executives are now examining whether the parents' private consultations and draft documents crossed contractual lines. The possibility of penalties or non-renewal is no longer theoretical. It is an active consideration. At the same time, Anna and Alex's potential civil claims introduce another layer of exposure. Years of filming a family reality series create a dense record of public statements, promotional language, and portrayals of permanent belonging. If those portrayals can be shown to have coexisted with private planning that treated the adopted children as removable, the emotional and financial exploitation argument gains force. Sponsors who once associated themselves with the Johnston brand as a symbol of inclusive family life now face a different association. Future streaming or licensing opportunities become more difficult once the dominant public story is no longer one of unity, but of selective loyalty and contingency planning. The network's pause and the emerging legal questions have already altered the practical environment in which the family operates. What once looked like a stable production schedule is now provisional. Decisions that used to be made inside the household are being reviewed by people whose primary concern is contractual, compliance, and brand risk. That external scrutiny removes the last layer of insulation the parents previously enjoyed. This is not just another family argument. It is a direct assault on the central myth the show has sold for years. Once audiences see the parents treating certain children as disposable assets rather than permanent family, the emotional contract with viewers collapses. Trent and Amber's damage control play may buy them short-term silence, but it accelerates the loss of trust inside the house. The most likely near-term outcome is a fractured filming environment, reduced episode orders, and at least one adult child permanently stepping away from the series. Longer term, the family brand that once rested on unity will be redefined by the very public question of who was truly considered one of us. The show's entire appeal rested on the idea that love and belonging were not conditional. Viewers watched the adoptions, the adjustments, the ordinary conflicts, and the ordinary affections, and they were invited to believe that these children had been fully and permanently folded into the family. The leaked materials and the nanny's recordings challenge that invitation at its foundation. If contingency plans for reduced support or quiet removal existed, while the public story emphasized permanence, then the audience was sold a version of the family that the parents themselves did not fully share. That gap between the marketed reality and the private planning is what makes the current crisis so corrosive. Trent and Amber's public insistence on unity and their private efforts to contain the story may succeed in limiting additional leaks for a time. They may even secure temporary cooperation from some of the children under pressure. But the internal damage is already done. Trust that has been broken by the discovery of exit provisions is not easily restored by carefully worded statements. Every future request for confidentiality, every adjustment to filming schedules, every limitation on access will be read through the lens of those documents. The adult children who once participated as cooperative cast members are now operating as independent parties, protecting their own interests and documenting the process. That change in posture makes the kind of seamless family storytelling the show previously delivered far more difficult to achieve. In the near term, the practical consequences are already visible. A fractured filming environment produces uneven episodes, reduced chemistry, and an audience that can sense the underlying tension. Networks respond to those conditions by ordering fewer episodes or shifting resources elsewhere. One or more of the adult children stepping away permanently would further alter the cast structure the show has relied on. Over a longer horizon, the brand itself is redefined. What was once marketed as a story of expansive, unconditional family becomes a story about selective belonging and the limits of that belonging when ratings and inheritance enter the conversation. Future opportunities that depend on public goodwill become harder to secure once that redefinition takes hold. The deeper question the situation raises is not only legal or contractual, it is moral and relational. Families that film their lives for public consumption create a dual reality: the private relationships that exist off camera and the public version of those relationships that generates income and attention. When the two diverge sharply, the people who were presented as permanent members have legitimate grounds to ask what their place actually was. Anna and Alex are now asking that question in concrete terms. Their siblings are being forced to answer it as well, whether through open support, careful distance, or attempts at neutrality that may prove unsustainable. If Amber's alleged plan is even partially true, do the biological kids have a moral obligation to stand with Anna and Alex against their own parents? Or does protecting the family's remaining legacy and income justify staying silent? That question sits at the center of everything that has unfolded. It is not abstract. It is being lived in real time through limited access to a grandchild, through private messages of support, through the decision to hire independent counsel, and through the refusal to sign new confidentiality agreements without scrutiny. How the biological children answer it will shape not only the next chapter of the family's public story, but the private relationships that remain after the cameras eventually stop. The Johnston family that audiences thought they knew is no longer the family that exists. The documents, the recordings, the legal consultations, and the children's responses have made that clear. What remains is the slower, harder work of determining which relationships can survive the exposure and which ones were always more conditional than the public was allowed to see. The outcome of that work will determine whether anything resembling the old family brand can continue, or whether the story finally ends with the acknowledgement that some members were never as permanent as the audience was told.